Pool School, brought to you by the Tote, with Luke Parkinson, Jamie Hart and Jamie Benson.
So we're gonna kick off today with the Placepot. Obviously, it's one of our most known bets and most loved bets that's been going around forever and is still as strong as ever today. So just Jamie Hart, to start with, just talk me through exactly what the Placepot is and how you play it for those that don't know.
To kick off, I mean, the Placepot is regularly talked about as the racing punter's favourite bet, and it probably is. It's something that every racing punter has dear to their heart. They've grown up with it. Obviously, for people that haven't played it before, it's a very simple bet in terms of giving you an interest across an afternoon's racing or a meeting's racing. You don't have to pick every winner or anything. It's over the first 6 races of any of the meetings, any UK or Irish meeting. It's on the first 6 races. And you just have to pick a horse to come in a place. So normally that's first, second or third. Sometimes with smaller fields, it's either first or second, or even just picking the winner if it's 4 runners or less. And in the very big fields like the Grand National, you'll get 4 places, but you need to pick a horse just to get in the places. So you don't need to pick a winner. As long as you pick a horse that gets in the places in those 6 races, you will win a dividend. Now, the dividend depends on how many people have won. So if you get £100,000 worth of money in there, in the pool, and £2,000 worth has managed to pick a place in each of the races, then you get £100,000 of money divided by those £2,000 of winners, and there's a £50 dividend. Now, that's how it works. In reality, the dividends can range from about, I think the smallest I've seen is about £6.70 when every odds-on chance comes in, and to the biggest ones that are up in the hundreds of thousands when you've got lots of outsiders, some of the big Cheltenham Placepots, things like that. But the average is around about the £400 mark, £440. So for £1, you're getting something that gives you an interest throughout a meeting and normally pays you a decent enough whack to make a big difference to your weekend if you get it up. And that's why people like it.
Excellent. And Jamie Benson, if you are new to the Placepot, where can you play this? Is it just with Tote, or is there any other ways that you can get on?
So you can play it with most bookmakers on their site or in betting shops. But I'd encourage you to play at tote.co.uk, because we also boost all dividends by 10%. So if you play with us, not only do you get all the pool data showing you who's in and who's out, but you get 10% extra boost on your dividend. So all you need to do is win it first. But that's the next bit.
Exactly. And just explain, Jamie Benson, we're going to have to come up with some names here, JB and JH or something to make it a bit easier than full names every time. But what about when you're at the racecourse? Obviously, it's slightly different than doing it on our app or on the website. There's a slip to fill in.
Yeah, absolutely. All you do is you fill in a slip, or you can just call it over directly to the people working behind the tills at the racecourse. Either way, the point is you get it on before the first race, and it's enjoyment for the rest of the day. And for me, I always think of it as it's a good way to be with some of the horses at the front of the market if you're that way inclined. I might look at to do outsiders in lots of other races throughout the day, but the Placepot is sort of my way of being with a lot of the favourites, or against them, as it might be, because actually the heart of the Placepot and the real logic behind it all is deciding which favourites to take on, and ultimately that's where the big dividends come in, is by favourites coming unplaced rather than by long shots coming placed. So that's the sort of the nuance in the logic of the Placepot, and what makes it for me the most fascinating puzzle.
So now we've touched on what it is, where you can play it. Now let's get into the nitty gritty. You two both like to have a Placepot, especially on a Saturday if you go racing anywhere. Jamie Hart, what's the best way for you of going about it? Shouldn't I just back the favourites and that's an easy way to make money?
It's interesting that, because when I was chatting to some people that don't know the Placepot, who haven't been betting for long, they say surely you just put the favourite in every leg. And we did some research on it, and actually doing the favourite every leg does pay you more than the yakka should do on the favourite every leg. So it's not a terrible thing to do. You'll never smash one out of the park if you put the favourite in every leg. I think we found it won in about 12, and it paid £13.40 on average when every favourite's placed. So it could be a kind of long-term plan, but it's not particularly exciting. It won't change your day significantly if you win it, but it's like Jamie says, when you look at the very the very big ones, quite often at least 3 favourites have been placed. So it's about finding that place where if the favourite doesn't make it, it's going to really knock a lot of people out of the pool, because it is about finding where people are going to be torpedoed out of the pool. So, you know, if you think about Cheltenham and where they've been very big payouts, it's where you get an Envoy Allen falling that suddenly bumps the place spot up, or it's, you know, those things that people are just can't see not being involved in the finish. Then they're the ones that can really make a difference. And you only need to get a couple of those to get up into the £1,000 kind of bracket for the dividends.
Sorry for anyone listening. There's Envoy Allen holds a special place in Jamie Hart's life, because Envoy let him down as a third leg of an anti-post treble for about 10 grand when he fell in the marsh. So anytime he gets brought up, it's a source of much joy for me, because it's literally the worst beat of his betting life.
I was going to say, you could tell there was a bit of a gripe there with Envoy Allen.
I think you'll find that in most of my betting, my friends seem to get more joy out of me losing than them winning. It's quite strange.
So, Jamie, Benson, how would you go about your play spot on a weekend, or whenever you put one on? How is your main tactic to go about it?
So, like I said, touched on earlier, my main focus is which favourites to be with and which ones to be against. It's quite often I find the makeup of races on a card a lot more interesting than necessarily the card itself. So I might, of a weekend, not necessarily do a play spot on the biggest meetings. I might do them on ones with interesting makeups. And the two different types of races that I really like are either very small runner fields or very big runner fields. Actually, funny enough, when there is sort of when there's sort of 8 to 10 runners, it can be a bit difficult to get horses unplaced, if you see what I mean. Like, because from 8 to 10 runners, you will have the 3 places, and quite often there are some rags in those fields, especially if they're things like novice hurdles or such like. It means that basically the favourite will almost always come place. So what I try to look for is, I really like big field handicaps, because obviously they're a lottery in the first place. So if you're picking the horses that finish in the placings there, then you're doing well for a start. But also any race with 4 or fewer runners, I would find that are fascinating, because it's only the winner that goes through in the play spot. So in that instance, even if you have the front 3 are all sort of fancied and you've got a rag, so it's still effectively a 3-runner race, you'll still see a large proportion of the pool go out just by the function of only one horse going through. So it's as much about the makeup of the card as who you're picking. And I mean, I know Jamie Hart is a massive fan of any time there is four runners or fewer, just putting all of them in and just cheering on the rag, because ultimately there are worse tactics to do. So it's definitely a different way of thinking about your betting of the day, and one I enjoy the challenge of.
Just talk us through that, Jamie Hart, where you can sort of put more than one into a leg. Obviously, that might be confusing to some other people. You're just picking one out and hoping that it wins. So how does that work when you sort of perm them up?
Yeah, so I mean, especially because you want to give yourself a better chance of winning over time. You can do straight lines, but if you're doing a straight line, you know, just one in each race, I mean, it's one stab and you've got to win it for starters, and you really want to give yourself a bit more chance than that. If you are playing favourites all the way through, then probably you would only put one line in, because if you do win, you can't really perm and get your money back.
I mean, it should be said that one good way of doing it, and I quite often do this, it was initially upon instruction from you, funny enough, Jamie, a few years ago, was I do my play spot, I perm it up to a few lines, and I might do maybe 32 lines for sort of 20p or so. So it's not a massive bet, and but then I also do a one straight line of sort of £2 on all the unnamed favourites, just in case it comes up all fabs, and my sort of chance at winning hundreds of pounds that I've gone with my play spot is screwed, or even worse, it wins and it pays out nothing. At least then I've got the sort of all the favourites covered in that single line, like you say.
Absolutely, and it's all about kind of layering up your bet. So if you think about the way and why there's so much value in the play spot, and why when you get people can play this with computer algorithms playing in with hundreds of thousands of perms and things like that, but they tend to layer their bets, so that in a more sophisticated kind of version of what Jamie B is talking about. They'll make sure that they're loading more money into the favourites than they are into the outsiders, and so you get a nice blend of a bet in a very big kind of complicated perm. Now the reason for that is because ultimately, whenever anybody's playing the play spot, just in a normal way, if you're betting in a betting shop or via any online method, any of the bookmakers or through the Tote, you kind of have to tick each of the numbers. And so if there is a 4 to 5 chance in there, but you also fancy the 5 to 1 chance, you might tick both of them. But it means that because you're multiplying out how many you have in each race, you've got half of your money will be going through the 4 to 5 chance, and half of your money will be going through the 5 to 1 chance, which in reality is not an efficient way to play, because you really want 80% of your money through the 4 to 5 chance, kind of 20% of your money through the 5 to 1 chance. But because of the way that all the interfaces are set up, that's how people play, and that's why there's value in the play spot, because most of the money going in there is spread out like that. It's not lent towards the favourites in as much of a way as it should be. So when you see people playing professionally across the play spot, you might find that they play much more around the favourites than around the outsiders, which is quite a surprise to some people, because they think, you know, the pros are obviously picking up big money, but they're not. They tend to win when it's a 30 quid dividend or a 40 quid dividend. That's when the professionals tend to be winning. When there's a 90 grand dividend and an 80 grand dividend, those kind of dividends, that's when the professionals have lost everything, because they play much more around the front of the market. They're the guys that are making the market. So when you are playing, think about that. Think about how you're kind of spreading your money through the bet, and do think about having more than one. If you're attacking something like Cheltenham, one of the big kind of Saturday play spots, do as Benson says, is it, you know, playing around the higher on the favourites, but then having those small perms with kind of, and you can do penny perms. You know, you can do on the Tote site, you can do, you know, if you do 2 in each race, you can do it's 2. So to work out your stake, you just multiply out how many you've got in each race. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 over the 6 races. That's 64 bets. If Jamie's playing it for 10p at £6.40 or 20p it's £13 at £12.80, but you can do it for 1p. So you can do 64p, you know, and throw in some outsiders, and you do a 10p one with that costs you £6.40 with the more favoured ones. Depending on what your bank is, you can layer your bets up on a play spot. You can play it quite sophisticatedly, because most of the people you're up against, I think at Cheltenham, on a normal Cheltenham festival day, on course, I think something like 72% of the play spots taken on course are £2 straight lines. So you're up, as soon as you're doing more than one per leg, you're already in the top third of sophistication, and you're playing against these kind of £2 lines that really don't stand as much of a chance as you do when you're choosing a few in each race. So do think about layering them up. I think the other thing is that you can also use the fact that the unnamed favourites there to help you, because when you're doing a play spot, you might be doing it on the way to the race course, or, you know, and when you're sitting in the pub at lunchtime on a Saturday or something, getting ready for the football, depending on what time of year it is. You might be looking at a race where it is a 4-runner race, but there it's kind of, it's 2 to 1, 9 to 4, 11 to 4, 7 to 2. They're all much, you know, it's a pretty close race. You could put all 4 of them in, but then also pick the favourite, or just put the favourite and one outside. But then you know that as the money comes in, because the favourite's the SP favourite at the time, the one that is best supported, you then get kind of twice as much on, because you're letting the market lean you towards weighting more, especially when you're on the 6th leg, the 5th leg, where the market hasn't really kind of sorted itself out when you're placing your play spot. You know, you've got a much clearer view of the first race. Use that favourite and perm that in with your perm, so that when there are those races where, or it's at 6 to 1 the field in the morning, and then suddenly, you know, which we see quite often, you know, JP McManus thing suddenly goes off at 11 to 4, and you thought it was 7 to 1 in the morning. You've got that in, and you might have it in twice, but you're doubling up on that, and you're letting the market kind of make your play spot more efficient. So that's something to really bear in mind, using that unnamed favourite as a tool. The other one that Jamie says he likes the 4-runner races, I do like those, because it really does bump up the the divvy, when if you get anything that isn't the obvious favourite going through in there, it decimates the pool, and you can be one of only a few left in. I like playing, you know, on a day with bad weather, where there's a 5-runner race, and you, because there's every chance one of them's not going to run, and then just being careful about what you put in, because you don't want suddenly all of your eggs to be in one basket, because you might, if the favourite's an on-runner, you go onto that second favourite that you didn't really like, or that you've got, you know, or you end up with 2 on the same thing. So it's always worth, in those 5-runner races, I quite like putting in like the 4th favourite, or the, just in case, you know, so that I'm in against the field, because if you get one of the other non-runners, all of that money will go onto the unnamed favourite, and you can blast out a lot of people that just, you know, saw it as it was, as 5 runners, and there could have been 2 big runners in it. It drops down to 1 runner, and that one place, because it's a 4-runner race, and that the favourite falls, and suddenly enough that, you know, everyone's playing those 2, the front of the market, but all the money was going onto that one, and it's fallen. You can have a sudden massive jump up in the dividend because everybody's out. So just, it's looking at those kind of angles, particularly when there's bad weather. I think we're good, you know, the weather's turning a little bit at the moment. Just looking at it today, and it's worth playing that, looking ahead for those kind of times where there will be non-runners that will change it.
I'd say also, Jamie, to that point around the fact that for the later races, the market isn't really that well formed. And in terms of, we all know how much money comes late to the market versus comes early to the market. And, you know, 50 quid can move a price overnight, whereas, you know, you need 50 grand to be moving a price nearly off. One of the things that I quite often look for is basically, you tend to end up with horses being over-indexed if they come in for money in the morning, even though they might then drift later. So if you see a horse that's backed in and you think, actually, do you know what, that's going to be a drifter, it's worth avoiding it and leaving it out and putting something else that you think might get backed in but hasn't seen the money yet, because they will be massively over-indexed. And you could get to a point where, come the off of that race, whether it's race 4, 5 or 6, that the horse that you're on has something like 10% of the number of tickets that the other horse has, but they could be the same price in the betting. So it's worth thinking about the dynamics of the market, because they do drive the percentage of the pool when the bet is struck. So at the first race, when that jumps, it still defines the horse, the selections later in the card. It's also why you should always have the unnamed fab in the bumper. It's like, if I had number one rule for the play spot, always go the unnamed fab in the bumper, because no one's got a clue until the late money comes, and then you could end up looking like a moron. In fact, I do that anyway. I never get to leg 6. What am I saying?
So I'm guessing from that, really, that you both think putting it on as late in the day as possible, your play spot, is probably the best option, rather than say sitting and doing it the night before.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely want to play late. I think the thing that frustrates me more, though, is sometimes if you think about playing late and then you get distracted, certainly midweek, you know, when you're at work and you go, right, I'll play late because I'm not sure if it's going to be a run or not, and then you miss it because you're just on a call or you're on a Zoom call for work and stuff. Suddenly the time goes away from you, especially
or maybe God forbid you're actually working rather than punting.
yeah, or something like that. You know, some people.
That's why I see this is a purely hypothetical argument, isn't it, Chair?
Some people don't have bedding at work. You know, you've got to think about those people. But it's you know, I think it's quite important to be as late as you can, but do be aware that, you know, I'm a massive FOMO sufferer. And so, you know, those times when I haven't got my play spot on because I've left it too late, you know, it's dangerous. But if you know you've got the time, you know you're watching it, do leave it late. Keep an eye on non-runners. Keep an eye on, you know, what the trainers are saying about whether they'll run, about whether they're leaving it late, because it really does affect or where that money in the play spot goes and how much money goes into the unnamed favourite. So you do need to keep an eye on that. Irish particularly as well. It's like Jamie says, even more in the Irish kind of big novice races and bumpers. You've got to throw the favourite in the mix in there.
And is there any way you two would go about, as well as the thinking behind it, in terms of your selection? Is the reading through the form and a horse that's placed more often than not, is that a good way to go? Is sometimes that can be a bit of a way to go down, really, if it's been consistent, but it's in handicap company, it could have gone up through the weights, and then that could be where you go out.
A lot of people do that. I mean, there's a lot of good form tools that you can use, that you can look into form and test against. So I know I use GG's quite a bit, and I'll look into, you can change the view from place only view to win only view. I'm not a massive fan of that. I'm more of a driven by course and ground form for mine. So you're wanting things that stay on, looking at things that stay on that don't win necessarily that much, so they don't go up in the weights. So you could say that those kind of placings are good for you. But that's the kind of stuff that I like. I like things that will be staying on, don't necessarily lead. I'm not a big fan of leaders in my play spot, but things that will sit there and plod on, that always give something at that track. The other one for me is, if you're looking at the racing post, it's worth avoiding, long term. It's probably worth avoiding the things that Spotlight puts in, because you've got so much money. So much money is driven into the play spot through betting shots, and now even online, nearly all of the major bookmakers take the racing post in terms of their content for enriching their race cards within their websites. Everybody's reading that verdict, and so the one that the verdict comes out to is always overrepresented in there. It doesn't mean you can't win, but you'll end up, if the Spotlight kind of goes through and the racing post Spotlight for each race gets placed, you're getting less than you would do, if you're playing normally like an each way acca or something. It'll be overplayed, so you want to avoid that.
Just on that mention of sort of courses and going and things, do you think there are better tracks for the play spot to be won? I'm thinking of tracks that might be unique, somewhere like Epsom, where you've got a certain horse that needs it, or Cheltenham, where you want a certain kind of horse to go on that track, and that can be another way in. Jamie Benson, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. I think Joe's hit the nail on the head there. There is definitely a nuance to picking your play spot horses versus your win bets and things like that. I have a small sort of preference for the top of the weights. It's all very much horse to horse dependent. But if I have a similar profile for two horses, one near the top of the weights and one near the bottom of the weights, I will almost always pick the one near the top of the weights, because they tend to have a more proven form, but they're probably a bit less exposed as a general rule. So ultimately, it does come down to the sort of the more intricate details, such as course form, especially, like you say, at any course that requires more of a specialist and where course form has more value, you can definitely over-index on those horses. But it's but then on the flip side, kind of one of the main points that Jamie's making there is that you also really need to consider what other people are going to be putting in. So, I mean, the one I always think back to is Clever Cookie. Do you remember on Champions Day when Clever Cookie was
as soon as it's raining?
Yeah, 15 pounds wrong at the weights, and was backed into sort of from like 25s into sort of like 5-1. And that would have been a classic example of one to leave out of your play spot, because it would have been over indexed. So it's just about trying to think intelligently about who the general public might be with and who they might not have considered, and then marrying that up against what you value in each particular race, which makes it the sort of fascinating puzzle that keeps us all entertained. And like you say, plus also we've talked about that, like it's a bloody science. All you're trying to do is find a horse to come place. How hard can it be, hey Jay?
Yeah,
exactly. Sounds so easy.
It's always easy afterwards.
Yeah,
exactly. So just before we wrap everything up, Jamie, I have a question for you. Why is the play spot sort of better than doing an each way acca?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this, and as with every type of betting, it's not always better. So a play spot and an each way acca. The thing with the play spot is, if you look across most meetings, you will see a mixture of favourites and outsiders placed. You'll normally get the average is 4 placed favourites every meeting, and so most play spots will have 4 placed favourites in them. If you're looking to do 6 big outsiders and shoot for the moon, say on a Cheltenham, something like that, you should probably be playing them in an each way acca with Bet365 or one of the big bookmakers that will give you a £2 million maximum payout at least, and play with them, because the worst thing ever, and as a sufferer of FOMO, is to sit there and get 16 to 1, 20 to 1, 25 to 1 chances in that should be a life-changing moment, and then at the same day every favourites come second or third and stuff, and your dividends hit on the play spot. Now, so if you've got 6 outsiders you want to back them in an each way acca in a straight line. But if you're looking to make profit out of the play spot and you think that the day is going to be much more usual, where you get a spread of favourites and outsiders, but mostly 4 favourites landing, it's picking those outsiders or the favourites to miss, putting in the 4 favourites that you fancy, and you're much better doing that. And you're much better doing that in a play spot, and you're much better doing it in a play spot, even if you want 6 favourites, because you'll tend to land, if you get them all placed, they're not winning, then the play spot will pay a decent amount. If you're playing that each way on an acca, then you won't get much back at all quite often. So if you're not shooting for the moon, and I'm talking millions, then normally a blend of favourites and outsiders will come in. So you want to play that in a play spot, but never, the tote. You should always remember the tote is just part of your betting portfolio. You should spread it around, spread some fixed odds around. The play spot is an absolute rock solid part of my Saturday or day's punting. To be fair, I'll be honest with you, it's part of my everyday punting. But for most people, it's a rock solid part of their Saturday, cornerstone of their Saturday punting, and it's there to sit there and kind of rely on. It's like Jamie B said at the start, he'll do his play spot and he might have more of the fancy kind of shorter ones in his play spot, and he'll be and knowing Jamie, he'll be sitting there doing singles and doubles across kind of the 33-1 chances, trying to knock something out of the park. But it's that mix that you want to play.
Exactly. So I think the lesson there is that whether you're a favourite backer or an outside chancer, there's ways to win the play spot either way, and the combination of both is probably the sweet spot. So thanks for joining us, guys, both Jamie Hart and Jamie Benson. Jamie Hart, remind us of your Twitter handle in case people want to get in touch on social media with you to give you a bit of stick about why the play spot didn't win.
Yeah, certainly. It's at Jamie H7.
Excellent. And Jamie Benson?
It's at jbeno28.
Lovely stuff. And you can get in contact with me at Tote Luke P. So plenty of ways to get in touch with us there, as well as the Tote Racing channels. We're at Tote Racing on Twitter and Facebook, and at Tote on Instagram, and obviously here on YouTube, where hopefully you've listened to this, or on one of the podcast providers. So thanks for joining us. Plenty more to come, plenty more educational stuff on all our bets, but hopefully whichever way you go now, you have a bit more luck with your play spot if you follow the guys' tactics. Hope you're enjoying this episode of Full School. Make sure you like and subscribe to get this podcast as soon as it's released. We've got plenty more coming up, so stay tuned.